we like. Yeah. Are we live? We are. Ooh, I'm too loud. Hello, hello. Welcome here this morning. Maybe I'm a little too loud. Yeah, they're adjusting me. I'm really happy to be here. My name is John Musker. I worked at Disney for many years. I actually retired this spring, but worked there for 40 years. And my great privilege at Disney at times was to, in directing the films that I was doing there, was to bring in talent from outside the studio to work on a particular film, particularly that seemed to suit their artistic disciplines. And it was in about 1995 when we were, Ron Clements and I, my writing and directing partner, were developing the movie Hercules, which was, we thought of in a way as our, it was our sports movie in a way, and it was sort of our screwball comedy, and it was our chance to do mythology, and specifically Greek mythology. And so we got to do all those things, but it was a question, what was the movie going to look like? And there was an artist that was working with us on the early development, Rick Mackey, who has been at CTN many times, wonderful character designer and things like that. Huge fan of Gerald Scarfe, which I also was. In fact, I will show you in my little treasure trove here. We'll see this image later, but I was showing it to Gerald today. I've saved for 50 years, but this is from the Chicago Daily News. I'm from Chicago, and it appeared in their art section. Gerald had a show there at the Vincent Price Galleries in Chicago, a show of his art and this wonderful coverage. I had also seen his work on Time Magazine and things like that, so I was a humongous fan at the age of 13 and 15 and whatever. So when Rick Mackey, flash forward years later, said, and at the time Gerald was, and we'll see a little bit, was developing artwork for The Magic Flute, a production at the LA Opera. And anyway, Rick said, you know who'd be great to work on this film is Gerald Scarfe. And I lit up, I was like, my hero, and I saw an analogy between Gerald's drawings, we'll talk more about that later, between his approach and the art that you see on Attic pottery and Greek vases. So we approached Gerald, we had no idea. The good thing for us was that Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was our boss at the studio prior to that, had left to start DreamWorks, and Jeffrey's tastes were very conservative. So it helped us that Jeffrey was gone, because Peter Schneider and Tom Schumacher, who were running the studio at that time, were much more daring and willing to take a chance to do something a little bit out of the box. So when I said to them, I would really like to use Gerald Scarfe to design this movie, they said, go for it, and they were completely behind it, which was amazing and great. So that became the introduction to working with Gerald. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a trip through Gerald's entire career. He's brought wonderful artwork. He's presented to very many groups over the years, and so he's prepared different sort of shows of his work. You're going to see stuff going back a long stretch up to current things. And it is my great honor and privilege to introduce I think one of the greatest draftsmen of the past century. I'm willing to say that. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gerald Scarfe.
Well, thank you, John. That's very, very kind. Kind words there. And thank you all for coming. It's great to see you here. I can't really see you, but I know there's some folks
I know the
out
lights
there.
they're recording this, so I think they need
As John says, I'm going to do a little kind of introduction to my work, and then we'll talk about this, that, and the other. And we'll go through various things I've worked on. My first piece of animation that I did personally, hand-drawn onto 70mm film. Then a little bit of my work for Pink Floyd, The Wall, and then we come to Hercules, which John and I did together. And I was so, can you imagine when John actually rang me one day, or wrote to me, I can't remember, out of the blue, would I like to be production designer on a Disney movie? Wow. And it all started with this one little drawing he saw when he was 14, 15.
Well, there's a better slide. You'll see it more close up. But it's Jacqueline Onassis, Jackie O, the wife of the widow of John Kennedy, married Aristotle Onassis, and a shipping magnate. And it's a very powerful drawing. And yes, that drawing was the genesis of a few years' work.
Got me the job. So maybe first of all, we'll just start off with a few drawings to show you the kind of thing I do in England and in the New Yorker. I've worked there for 15 years and various periodicals around the world. I've had a lot of exhibitions in Germany, Czech Republic, that kind of area of Europe. I'm known there as well. You've been extremely kind to me, you Americans. You sent me this wonderful man. Mr. Trump. Now, he's my muse.
Cartoonist dream, right?
Cartoonist. He's my muse. Every day he does something stupid that I can draw. And this is the first one I have to show you. This is the one of Trump being born from the Republican elephant. And he's breaking like a kind of a superhero from the stomach of the Republican elephant. It's like Alien did. You know, remember the film Alien? And he says, we're going to make America hate again. And he's, you know, wonderful material. First of all, he's a braggart. He's a show-off. He's a misogynist, first of all.
Yeah.
You know, here he is. Locker room banter, this one's called.
And was this a generalized woman, or is this a specific one? There's so many.
Well,
so
there was one woman at that time who complained.
Okay.
I can't remember who it was, but he's got many arms there, and we all know what he said about women, but I'm not going to say it now. And then, of course, you know, he's a great show-off. Here he is. This one's called Rocket Man, and he says to Kim Il-jong, "That's what you call a rocket, fat boy."
I love the Kim Jong-il, or
Yes.
with his mushroom cloud head.
I mean, these are sort of I can print these in my newspaper in London.
You can, because
I can. This was printed in the Evening Standard.
Okay.
And so I think sometimes, you know, we're more open in
it
Europe
seems
about
so,
you know,
yeah.
our images, and I have shown these before to people, and they're shocked. I've actually, John knows, I've cut out some images
Yeah,
today.
we had a few that
I personally thought
he cut them.
I
Actually.
didn't think.
But have you ever gotten editorial pushback on any of your images?
Of course, yeah. I mean, occasionally they do say that's a bit too far for a family newspaper, as they call it. You know.
Right. I was saying to some of the younger people here, although it's a mixed crowd, but newspapers are these things on paper. I realize anyone under the age of 25 doesn't really know what a newspaper is, but they're good. You should try one. But okay. All right.
So anyway, you know, he immediately, having said he was a rocket man, he changed his mind and said, "Ain't he just the cutest little monster you ever did see?" He joined up with Kim Il-jong.
That's right.
People say to me, "Do you have any heroes?" Well, Obama was a hero to me. I thought he was an amazing man, and I always drew him as sort of Superman because, you know, he had so many expectations. People expected so much from him. But then, of course, you know, like Superman, he was born in the phone box like this and rushed out the other side, and wham, Shazam, he runs straight into the fist of reality, which was ISIS and all the other problems he had to deal with. So this is really the story of Superman saving the world. He did his very best. And he even had to deal with the Republican Party, of course. You know, here he is. Yeah. I call this one the elephant in the room, the Republican elephant sitting on him.
Oh, that's fabulous.
But I've had a great kind of romance with your American presidents. And the reason is, of course, you have so much power, you Americans. They say when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, because what happens here really affects everybody.
Right.
And one of my favorites, of course, going back was George Bush. And I drew him like that.
This was sort of around the mission accomplished period.
It's on the mission accomplished period, yeah. But what we had in England was this stupid prime minister called Tony Blair. And Tony Blair we called the poodle, because he was a poodle who he spent most of his time up George Bush's backside, as you can see. This one's
Did
called...
you ever get any comment from Tony about your representation?
I try not to meet them.
Okay.
You know.
I can see why. Yeah.
And, you know, the terrible truth is it all grist to their mill. It helps their career, really. It means if you're caricatured, you're a person of note. You're someone who's right.
Does that make you feel conflicted, like I'm
It does, yeah. I hit them as hard as I can, and they still like being depicted.
Yeah,
and
sometimes they even ask for the drawings.
They buy the drawings sometimes, yeah. This one, incidentally, is called In a Tight Spot. And, and I had this one here of... this time Bush flying over the burning oil fields of Iraq, because they went to war together, as you remember.
Yeah, Blair was a supporter of
And it says, "Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's a fucking disaster." Excuse my English language.
Yes.
Old English.
Yeah, it's Old English. Chaucer, I think.
And of course, Tony Blair, therefore, thereafter was chained to the ball and chain of Iraq.
He was. He sort of married himself to
for
the
the
Bush
rest
administration.
for the rest of his life. You know,
Yeah,
that's going to be his legacy.
Okay.
We have done a stupid thing in Britain. We have decided to cut ourselves off from Europe with Brexit. I don't know whether you've read about Brexit,
It's
but
a whole exit strategy. This is
here-
Theresa May here.
Theresa May here
who
cutting.
may not be there in a week or something.
She
We'll
may
see.
not. She's having a rough time.
Yeah, Brexit is. She's trying to roll it forward, and it's meeting resistance from her
Sure.
own cabinet.
But it's not all bad news. I like to draw, you know, social figures as well. This is the Rolling Stones, Mick and Keith here.
You've done many of Mick over the years, it seems like. And they're fabulous.
He's a very good subject. You know, he's got
And has
this-
he ever reacted to your drawings? I mean, they're fans, right?
Yes. I mean, he used this image on a T-shirt. I
Yeah.
think. So I think that's okay.
Well, and I think you've always had kind of a rock and roll sensibility, if I might say. You sort of paralleled, you know, similar in age to them and kind of came up with them. So I feel like we'll get into Pink Floyd and all that. but I
Sure,
feel
yeah,
like
yeah.
it
A
goes together.
couple of other quick ones I did. This is Madonna in one of her outfits. Excuse me, when she had a sort of those cone-like breasts. This is Woody Allen. You know, people say to me, where did all this begin? How did it begin? Well, I was a sickly, asthmatic child. I was born with asthma, and I still have asthma now, as you can hear me coughing just then. And so when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time in bed and a lot of time in hospital, and that's really where I learned to draw and to express myself through drawing. You know, it was my way of putting down my fears about the world. And it still is, I guess, you know. And my father was in banking. He wanted me to go into banking, but thank goodness I wasn't good enough to do that. And I was able to, you know, practice. I can't imagine being in a bank. But
Did your parents encourage your drawing, or were they tolerating it?
they
or-
encouraged it, but they did not send me to art school.
Oh,
Unfortunately, they sent me straight to a kind of commercial art studio, which was a help, but...
yeah.
The first drawing I ever printed was this one here, which was in a comic at the time called Eagle Comic.
Okay.
And as you can see at the bottom, it says Eagle Artist's Nightmare. That was me, age 16. And encouraged by that, I thought, this is great. I can actually print drawings and make use of myself in this way. And the next thing...
Wait, let's hold on for a second. Is this the drawing that you told me was involved in a contest?
No, it's coming up.
It's coming up, okay,
Yeah.
all right, good, okay.
The next drawing I did print was this particular one, where I won the first prize in an Ingersoll watch competition. I had to draw this advertisement, and to my amazement, I won first prize. This was fantastic, you know, and I remember being so thrilled at the time. Now, the interesting thing about this picture is, if we get a closer look at it, it says at the top here, this design has won Gerald Scarfe first prize, blah, blah, blah. And then down at the bottom, 12 and over group of congratulations. You see second line from the bottom, David Hockney of Bradford. Now, David just sold his
Yes, $90 million.
$90 million yesterday.
For one of David Hockney's pieces.
So he got
But
first.
I bet he wishes he got first place in this. He still regrets
It was
that.
actually him who told me about it. His mum had
Really? Oh, they pointed out
his
to you?
mum had pointed this out. You
That
know.
is such a great thing.
But the type of stuff I had to do in the studio, which was terrible, heartbreaking stuff. I had to make terrible kind of thin bits of material look like wonderful, sumptuous blankets in order to sell them. I had to sell all this
So
stuff.
how old were you when you were drawing these? Were
It's
you
about 16.
16, wow, okay.
16, 17. And I even had to draw bathroom suites, this sort of thing like this, you know. So it was a very, very bad beginning to my career. And I never thought at that time I would ever get where I have got. But on the other hand, it did teach me to draw. You know, I could draw, as you can see, lavatories. I could draw bicycles. I could
There's a
draw.
big demand for that.
Oh, there is a big demand. But in those days, of course, there was no photography. It wasn't used
It's
so
all, yeah,
much.
illustration.
It was retouch photography,
Yeah.
but it was mostly illustrations that gave, you know, the look to things. So since those days, of course, I've moved on, and I thought I'd just quickly show you where I work. This is a studio in Chelsea in London. It's a big, light and airy kind of studio.
We visited that when we were on Hercules. We came by
And
your
the
flat.
wall there behind me is where Tom Schumacher saw all these drawings pinned up. And
Yeah.
he writes about them in your book, about
He does,
Hercules.
yes.
saying he was blown away by this wall of drawings, which he then packed up and took back to Burbank.
That's right. He carried them back to Burbank. Yeah, Gerald worked on these huge drawings, and your thing there, and as I recall back in the day, I don't know if it still is that you often drew or standing up rather than sitting down. How does it go?
I draw standing up. And a lot of artists, you know, especially animators, they work from the wrist like that.
Yeah.
Others may work, you know, slightly broader, but I stand and I...
Yes, you draw from the shoulder, which is why your drawings, I think, have that power, because you're not doing that.
I try to sort of whack it onto the paper, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And as you can see, I work very large. Those drawings on the wall behind me are kind of like 1 meter high, 3 feet high. And when I work on these drawings, I can almost tell immediately when I start them whether they're going to be any good or not. It's a bit like, I think, a building, you know, architecturally, if you don't get the foundations right, if the first lines aren't right, I feel I have, and quite often my studio looks like that, where I've had to, this is all working on one drawing. On one particular day, I took this photograph, had this photograph taken, which shows all of the false starts that I made on this particular thing.
Wow.
Because I kind of know if I go on, you know, there is a way of battling on and making the drawing work, but usually I restart again.
And do you rough out things in pencil first? Do you go straight to ink? Or
Straight to ink. I'm like an impulsive artist,
wow.
and I don't have. That, yeah. And when I was working in animation, I was very, very impressed with the patience of animators who are doing the same drawing frequently over and over again, with small changes. And I'm a much more impulsive guy, and that's why it was extraordinary that you and everybody at Disney accepted me. I was a real kind of maverick.
Yeah, I mean, he was very much a collaborator, and we'll get into that as far as really back and forth with all with the artists. Yeah.
I had one hero when I was a child, a guy called Ronald Searle, who was an English artist who he did St. Trinians, and he also did some animation himself. And he was my great hero, and I found out where he lived in London, and I thought I'd go and ask him about, you know, how do you become a cartoonist, because there are no schools or books in England about, you know, how you do that. I found out where he lived, and I used to cycle down to his house with a batch of questions in my mind, which I was going to ask him. But, you know, when I got to his house, which I can kind of see now, it was set back from the road, and there was a big arched doorway with a green door in it. On the right side of the door was a brass doorbell, and my finger would not reach that doorbell. I lost courage, and I never, ever, ever rang the doorbell and went in and said, "How do you do this?" Years later, my wife took me on a holiday to Provence, and we went into this restaurant, and who should be sitting there but Ronald Searle? And this is him, and he
just died a few years ago.
He died in the age of good age of 90. Yeah. And he put a little package on my place setting where I was sitting for lunch. And I said, "Is this for me?" And he said, "Yeah." Shall I open it? And he said, "Yeah, of course. This is only something small." I opened it up, and inside was this doorbell. The doorbell I was trying to press, you know, and he says here, "Gerry Scarfe, please ring any time." So he's a sweet guy, and he really, really helped me, you know. Without seeing him, he was my hero at that time.
Yeah, one of the, again, a great draftsman, and it's cool. It's the Ronald Searle graphic printing style.
Yes.
Very distinctive, yeah.
And then, you know, just to go back to my career very quickly, the thing that made the big difference to me was there was a magazine in England you may not have heard of, or you may have done, called Private Eye. It was a satirical magazine, and it went for everything, tooth and claw. It took politicians apart, it took society apart. And that's where I really found my feet, this magazine. This is the Prime Minister at the time, Harold Wilson, behind LBJ, and about to lick his backside, which is another example of Britain and America working together. He said, "I've heard of special relationships, but this is ridiculous," he's saying. So that was a time in my life where I really came up and through. Now, John, you asked me to put this one in, which was Churchill. I had to go and draw Winston Churchill in the House of Commons on his last day.
Was this literally his last day?
It's literally his last day. And
it's an amazing drawing. I just love the drawing.
We in Britain had only been allowed to know about Churchill as this iconic warlord, the guy.
We just had a film, his Darkest Hours or whatever. But the war years, where he was the Lion of Britain and saved, England from the Nazis. And
absolutely, that's all we knew about him. He had a cigar. He defied the Germans, as you say. When I came to do this drawing, as you can see, he was senile. He was an old man. But we, the public in Britain at that time, had not been allowed to see the reality. But of course, my job really as an artist is to tell the truth, especially after being in that kind of commercial art studio where I was telling lies all the time. So, that's the drawing I made. When I took it back to the Times in London, who had commissioned it, they wouldn't print it because they said, you just imagine what his...
Really, they wouldn't print it? I forgot, yeah.
Well, his wife, Clemmy, she was called.
Yeah.
She was American, I think.
Yeah.
She would be upset if that came through, on the newspaper the next day. So I'm afraid that never was seen.
Do you still have the drawing in your...
I still have it.
Museum or anywhere or no? In a museum anywhere? Or
it's in the House of Commons, yeah, which is our parliament,
Okay, yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, but then I did put it up for sale at Sotheby's recently, but it didn't reach the figure I wanted it to, so I take it back. Okay. So I do drawing from life as well. Time magazine sent me to draw the Beatles when they were making the film Help. I made drawings of all them. That's Ringo on the left, and George and Paul, and John on the right. And these are the kind of drawings I do for notes to myself, from which I can work later. And the cover I did for Time, based on these drawings, was this one here, which is 1960.
It's 67, I think. I did see this, and I saved this issue of Time magazine. And these are actually papier-mâché sculpts that you photographed for the cover, right?
Yeah, papier-mâché.
Now, why not do a drawing in this case? What had led you into doing papier-mâché sculpts?
Because I wanted to push on and develop, and I've always felt, because of my bad start as an asthmatic and going into a commercial art studio, that I'm late and that I have something more to offer. I always felt that. And I was pushed into three-dimensional, I've pushed into movies, I've pushed into stage and theater and all of that. It's an effort, really, to try and find out where I might have been if I had gone to art school or something like that.
And you have a funny story about this, too, in terms of you stored these in a garage or something, and then insects started eating them?
Yeah, biscuit beetles. Biscuit beetles at the Beatles.
Yeah, the beetles were eaten by beetles.
So it's kind of like...
So they're a little bit chewed away now.
Like woodworm, tiny, it's covered with holes. No, they've gone. They're no longer with us.
Oh, too bad.
But I did do quite a lot of work for Time. The Time magazine sent me to follow Nixon around. Another thing John asked me to talk about, although I was saying, this young audience here, you probably
Richard
don't
Nixon
vaguely
was the
remember
president of the United States back in 68 to Watergate time.
So I followed him around, and he didn't really want me to go, but Time, being omnipotent, said, we've got this guy, we've got to send him. There's nothing you can do about it. So I did travel with him to Cheyenne and various places like that. And I think he kind of decided to join me, if I was going to be there. And I would sit in the front row with my drawing pad and everything, and he would say, "Oh, hi, Jerry, your pencil's sharp today," And so he kind of joined in the... And from this drawing, I made a papier-mâché figure of Nixon, like that. And that was for Time cover. It did not make it.
Oh, it didn't.
He was looking like a very real candidate for president at that point, and they
got cold feet?
They got cold feet, yeah. But I did various others. I did Rowan and Martin, which was good.
Yeah. Laugh and Pray, but old enough to remember that. Fabulous Dan Ron, Dick Martin.
I had one of the perks of that is I got to paint that girl in the background there. Sounds a little bit #MeToo, but never mind. And that is actually me in the bottom right-hand corner there, playing a part. There used to be a German character. Very interesting.
That was Johnny
Yeah.
Johnson, you
Yeah.
know, was the German.
Very
yeah.
interesting.
So you photographed yourself doing that?
Well, I was photographed doing, yeah. And then, of course, I worked for New Yorker for about 15 years, worked with them. And pushing on again, I tried to move into sculpture, This is the biggest piece I made for Osaka in Japan. It's Gulliver, the Gulliver's Travels. And this is made totally of scrap metal. And it went to Osaka, and I never heard of it again, so I don't know what happened to that. There was another sculptor, once again, John asked, I think, to see this, which was Chairman Mao. This is a pun made out of a chair, Chairman Mao. And
I just think this is the most amazing thing. Yeah, I love it. The navel and the upholstery somehow finding a way together. Yeah.
When I printed this in my last book, and it was printed in China, and I traveled to China to check the colors and the proofs and all that. And they would not print this in China.
Really?
Because Chairman Mao still although he's dead, he has this huge kind of following, following there. And so they had to take it to Hong Kong. They could print it in Hong Kong, but not in China.
Wow.
However, the latest news is that my new book, which is being printed next year, I'm banned from China entirely now.
Really?
And,
is that progress? Okay.
it has progress, yeah. Then to come to a bit of film, you know, the first animation things I did was, I worked on this 70mm film. I drew directly onto the film itself. There was an A roll and a B roll. I would draw on the A roll, and the image on the A roll would be reflected underneath the B roll, so I could alter it as we went along. And these, I drew. This was in Burbank. I came here for about 6 weeks. And I drew everything American I could think of at the time. Playboy magazine, Empire State Building, the moon landing at that time, and Mickey, Walt, and everything, of course, and Nixon. Everything, and it was Black Power at that time too, I remember. And it was like a stream of consciousness that I drew. And I called it Long Drawn Out Trip because I came for 2 weeks and I stayed here 8, I think. That was, and then it was also the time of tripping,
right.
tripping with drugs. And to that end, I drew Mickey here.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest character in show business, Mr. Mickey Mouse.
Hi, Buzz.
Hey, man, that was far out, man. We got to cut, man.
That sounded like Cheech at the end. Was Army
It
Chong?
was.
that Tommy Chong? Yeah, it sounded like
Cheech and
Tommy
Chong. I
Chong.
stole it from there, yeah. But I mean, I remember when I showed that at Disney, squeaky clean Disney.
Yes.
When we were working together,
Yes,
that seemed like sacrilege at
Yeah.
the time. Mickey on drugs.
It's a movie of its time, yes, right.
Anyway, this particular movie was seen by 2 members of the Pink Floyd. They watched it independently and they rang one another, called one another the next day, and said, "Did you see that movie last night? Wasn't it, great?" and so forth. And they said, "We've got to have this guy work for us. He's fucking mad." So that's how I got to join with Pink Floyd and work with them over a period, I suppose, of 5 to 6 years. And of course, I still know them now. And that was great because I was able to, branch out again, get away from the sort of political cartoons and do more adventurous scenarios and so forth. This is the Scream. All of these things, I was able to branch out and work in watercolor colors and also to animate or to be a director of animating. The one we just saw of Mickey, I drew myself, as you can see. It's pretty rudimentary and rough, that one. But then, of course, when we came to Pink Floyd, it was very polished. You need a lot of money, as we all know, to produce an animated film. And Pink Floyd had the money, like Disney have the money. And that's the only place you can do it. And I worked with Roger on that show. We wrote it together. I wrote I designed the images, of course. And we put the show on. This was a huge inflatable that I made of one of the characters. Yeah. We had marching hammers that marched before us. These were projected up by 3 projectors onto a screen. It was a huge kind of Roman circus of a show, really.
I saw it, in the more recent incarnation, maybe it was 10 years ago or something. Roger did it here, and Roger Waters from Pink Floyd did that more recent version in L.A., and I hadn't seen the original, and it was amazing. Plane flies over your head and crashes. It's spectacular theater.
It's that really encouraged me to join them, because they were so theatrical, and I love theatricality. Yeah. And we did some very kind of detailed work. These are the flowers that sort of grow up, make love, fight, and then destroy one another. And the amount of work in these, these are like caron dash drawings. Yeah. And we did, of course, I think there were at least 24 of these a second. Yeah.
You were a kid during the war. Did you have to deal with the Blitz and the bombing?
Yeah, but a lot of that comes from me being in the war. I'm 82, and I was born in 1936, so that was before the war. And we actually had to hide in the cellars of the house when I was far more worried about the wolf that I thought was in the cellar.
Oh, really? Than you were about the German bombs?
And about Hitler, yeah. I thought there was a wolf in the cellar.
Oh, really?
I hated going down there. However, so a lot of that is, my memories of the war. And suits well. But Roger, who also wrote the music, he was born just after the war, but he did lose his father in the war.
I thought he lost his father in the war.
Which was a big, thing.
Yeah.
And talking of Roger, the power of Pink Floyd is amazing. I get emails from all over the world, pretty well weekly, well certainly weekly, if not daily. And there was one guy who wrote to me, who said that could he have my signature? And I said, what for? And he said, I would like to have it tattooed on my arm, because I've covered my arm and my chest with all the images that you drew from the wall. And I said, sure, cool. If you want to mess your body up, here's my... So he sent me a VHS, I think it was in those days, of this tattoo being put on my signature on his arm, with the blood running and the tattoos mopping the blood away. And he addressed me, and he was the kind of... he said, Mr. Scarfe, I'm a Gulf War veteran, and you helped me get through the Gulf War. Your images and the music of Pink Floyd, which I thought was extraordinary. How could this macabre, grotesque images help this guy? Right. And he said, I'm going to send you my Gulf War medal, and he did. He sent me his Gulf War. Wow. Of course, I sent it back. I said, "You're the hero, not me." But it just shows you the power of music and images, really. This guy, and I think we all have a kind of memory from music when we met our first girl or boy or friend, and certain moments in our life are marked by music, aren't they? And this is Roger signing the arm after I'd signed it, and so I have a lot of tattoos on arms around the world. Very quickly then, John, towards Hercules. I designed for the theatre. This is a ballet I designed, The Nutcracker. And Orpheus in the Underworld was shown here at LA Opera.
It's great to see how your drawings realized in 3 dimensions like this.
Yeah, and there I designed the costumes, and I designed the background and everything about the whole thing. It's like, as David Hockney has said, it's like painting the stage, the whole environment.
Right.
And what you, I think, heard about was about the magic flute, which I was doing about the time.
Yeah, I came and saw it then at the music center there. And you'll see another picture that takes Gerald's drawing and makes it realized for the stage, which is...
Yeah, it does feature this hanging snake, which we put on stage like this. Tamino, the main character, is menaced by this snake at the beginning of the opera. I'm not a great opera fan, but I mean, I'll take work anywhere.
I'm not a huge opera fan either, but
Yeah.
I did see this, and it was amazing.
Then
yeah,
there I had
startling.
to design costumes. This is the Queen of the Night, you know. So I found myself designing, you know, women's costumes, men's costumes, and dealing with the costume fittings and all that. This is a guy called Papageno, who is a bird man. He catches birds in the cage on his back. That's my design on the left. And I covered him in feathers and so forth. They were all slightly comic, I guess, and cartoony, or whatever the word is.
Fabulous.
And I actually made a whole bunch of animals that were hybrids, half one thing and half the other. And then we come to the drawing that John mentioned earlier, which is...
Yes. So this was on the cover of that Saturday section. Jacqueline Onassis and her husband, Aristotle Onassis, a Greek shipping magnate, very wealthy guy, and Jackie was another of his sort of acquisitions, I guess you would say. And,
Absolutely.
And it was just such a powerful statement. And I remember reading, so I don't know if it was attributed to you or someone writing about you that said that your approach to caricature involves stretching things to the limits of recognizability.
Yeah.
And which I felt like this totally looks like Jackie O, and yet it's, you know, she's got eyes that are on the sides of her head and everything.
Well, I
but
often say it's like a piece of chewing gum. You know, you can stretch it,
Yeah.
stretch it. Suddenly it's gone.
Yeah.
The likeness is gone at a certain point.
Yeah,
But
so
how
you
far?
go, how far can you go and still retain the likeness?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's amazing about both of these, yeah. And so this was really an influence on me, and we contacted Gerald, and we had no idea if he'd be interested in something like this, and I knew he had a
Come
slight
on.
history with animation, certainly, with the wall,
Yeah.
but he was very game.
And then we went to Herc, of
Then
course.
we went to Hercules, yes.
And this is me, and
So this is here just down the street at the studio in Burbank, and drawings of his on the upper right. Those were sketches by Rick Mackey and other people as they were exploring, and then you see Gerald's below, which were so powerful, and he did in his studio in London and brought over, and we'd talk on the phone, and then fax was the big thing. We'll show some of that.
Yeah,
he would draw on the fax for the animators.
And then I came over quite a lot, didn't I?
Yeah,
Eventually
there was a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
We did have a whole symposium in Santa Barbara where we had all the animators together,
Sure.
and Gerald, and we sort of exchanged ideas,
That was
did
a
drawings over drawings. And
Scary moment for me because I'd done about like a year's work
Yeah.
designing all these characters like
Yeah.
Phil and
Zeus, this
here.
wonderful Zeus animated by Tony DeRosa.
And then I had to put them in front of the animators, and I thought, you know, what are they going to say? Are they going to? And reading the book afterwards that was made, The Art of Hercules,
The Art of Hercules, yeah.
I discovered that they had so much trouble, so much problem with my work. I
was a
didn't know that
challenge.
at the time
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it was not house style, and
Right.
it was something very difficult to adapt to.
Everybody
My
had to
line,
stretch. Right.
yeah. Hades I designed, you know, I thought he should have fire about him and he should be able to express himself through fire. And that's what we did with him in the film. And of course, you know the system, but it was fresh, new to me that every animator has a sort of guide.
Yeah, we sort of cast the animators by character. So Nick Ranieri was the lead animator on Hades, and so he was involved in generating these model sheets of turns in space. That's the thing with Gerald's drawings, where they work on a flat plane, but here they had to work dimensionally. So we had to take drawings that were flat, but how could you sort of turn those sharp shapes and make them work kind of in a volumetric way and yet retain the graphic quality? That was the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, some people managed it, others just ignored
Some
it.
had a harder time.
Ignored
than
it
others, yeah.
completely.
Or they ignored it.
Went
right,
on the usual way.
Right,
On
yeah,
the
it
old,
was tough.
And so then you would send me by fax drawings by the animators. The one on the left is the animator's drawing. Mine is, I just went over with my line
Right.
to kind of keep it, you know, in my line on schedule,
Right,
on
so there'd be
line.
little proportional adjustments
Yeah.
and finding bigger shapes sometimes that would, again, come
Yeah.
from your...
I was
drawing
also
from the shoulder.
impressed, you know, that you did a whole set of things mixing
Yeah.
Disney and Scarfe.
Yeah,
because
Sue Nichols put together this packet, wonderful Sue Nichols.
I learned a
design,
lot about
yeah.
myself there.
Yeah, things you did intuitively. Suddenly we were trying to analyze what
She-
it was, and Sue was picking things
Yes.
in terms of the shapes and the
She
detail.
described, you know, what it had to look like.
Well, and there's words here. When we were working with Gerald on this, we went to the British Museum where they've housed many of the marbles from Athens, the Elgin marbles that were pirated away from Greece. But Gerald distilled Greek art, and he said that Greek art to him had a combination of power and elegance. And so those became our buzzwords as we were developing both the characters and the backgrounds is,
Yeah.
can you make it powerful and yet retain some kind of elegance to it, a stylization?
There's a little bit of film here. Do you think we've got time for Ellen? I should
Yeah.
think, yeah.
Yeah, we
okay.
could do one with the
I
other
also
videos,
made
yeah.
drawings like this, which is Pegasus Landing. I wanted
Yeah.
Pegasus.
Let's see Ellen. Ellen was the animator, Ellen Woodbury, who now lives in
Just to give an
Colorado,
idea,
yeah.
you know, my idea, because people
Yeah.
were having difficulty dealing with my drawings, what I would, you know, how I would land
Yeah, this
papers.
feels very animated.
And there's a bit of film here that I did with Ellen. What was her name? Woodbury.
Ellen Woodbury, yeah.
Yeah,
Ellen Woodbury.
Well, first of all, I took my inspiration from this wonderful horse here that I've got a model of, which comes from the British Museum. I know, of course, that's never going to get into the film, but I'm going to try my best to get something like that. And taking this kind of line and this kind of elegance, I went on to try and get a sort of flow of line into it. And I thought very early on that he should have a Trojan mane. Some of the heads you've been doing are getting very large.
Yeah, I think with the smaller head it makes him a lot more elegant, especially
Yes,
with the longer.
these are much better. It's getting more towards a sort of more of a thoroughbred now, isn't it? It's not so much the old farm horse Dobbin.
Yeah, and it looks a little. It's a little more ethereal, more like this is.
Well,
this
but
is a
what
horse
we
that-
have to do is,
and we have to go. Okay, where's the volume? What is that shape? And how can I know that shape so that I can duplicate it? I really don't know if I can turn this because this isn't the way I was thinking. Is okay. What exactly is the shape of that nostril, and what does this muzzle look like when I'm coming down?
But I know you have a horse of your own. You know what the shape of the nostril is like when it's facing you.
But I don't know what the shape of your nostril. He steps out of the hug into this magnificent pose, like aren't I terrific?
Yeah.
And then he does this silly walk, sort of like a pigeon, where he sticks his neck way out. And then he ruffles his feathers,
Right.
and he comes up into this peacock pose.
Very good.
So I succeeded in making an elegant horse act silly.
Very good.
He's a magnificent horse with the brain of a bird.
So that's the fusion of, Ellen Woodbury and Gerald Scarfe. Yes, and here, yes, this is a great...
So, I had difficulties communicating what I wanted.
yeah.
But people like Ellen and so forth did
And
a
yeah,
grand job.
Nancy Beeman, we worked closely with Nancy on the
you-
fates. I don't know if we have a drawing of the fates here, but yeah.
You also asked me, John, to put the Hydra in.
Oh yeah, the Hydra, the fight with Hercules and the Hydra. Some of the characters that Gerald designed went more literally into the film. Certainly the Hydra, and I think you got Cerberus, the dog. Those were, in some ways, easier in some ways to translate. Where you had like Herc and Meg, those were, I'd say, of slightly less interest to you in a way because they were sort of the straighter characters and less caricature involved. But others went very directly into the film. And it was, in the Hydra case, we had to build these in CG, so it was an additional thing because we had to actually build them in the computer because we took one head and multiplied it by 100, yes.
I
love
remember,
this drawing.
at the end of it, I said, because after you've done it in CGI, it looked computerized naturally.
Yeah.
And then you had to go over the whole thing again to make it look graphic.
Right.
And I remember saying to you, wouldn't it have been better to do it in the old Walt style in the first place? And he said, yeah, maybe, and cheaper too.
Yeah,
You know.
the challenge in the case of the Hydra was just we wanted 100 heads there, so it's like we felt like it would work. We could use the computer to our advantage there, but it made it harder. It definitely made
Anyway,
it harder.
my designs were like, this is Pain and Panic, and this is how it came out in the film, pretty close. And then Nancy, I did the Fates, who were like the three Fates who share this eye between them. And this is how they came out in the film.
Yes.
And we'll just show you a little bit now to end with of Hades going down into the underworld and past the dog, Cerberus, the three-headed dog.
Again, yes, this dog went in very much exactly like this drawing.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes,
It
you
goes
can see
on.
Gerald, his influence percolated into the backgrounds, certainly in the underworld, all those sharp shapes and all. We were trying to sort of put the characters in a world that would fit the characters. And it was a great thrill to work with Gerald. And I want to thank you. We have time for maybe just a couple of questions before we move on. If
We can maybe get one or maybe
yeah, one or
two.
Okay. Anybody have a question for Gerald?
What year did you start working in feature films, and how did you figure out a way to transition from just making comics to working in film?
Well, I can't remember the year. I'm very bad on dates. But I mean, the first film I did was the one I showed you where I drew Mickey on drugs. I did that, I guess, in the 1970s or something like that.
Yeah, in the 70s.
But I'm known as an animator in this environment. But outside, I'm known generally as a kind of artist or caricaturist or stage designer, all these other things. So I wouldn't call myself specifically an animator. I mean, the only animation I've ever done are the 3 bits you've seen, I think, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I don't want to give you the impression that
Sort of a sideline for Gerald, but
yeah. But I adapted to it very quickly because I've always been a Disney fan. I've always loved comics, and I've just followed that. The whole of my world has been visual all the time.
I have another question.
And
We're gonna end this round, because we're almost done. But
yeah.
first up, it's a privilege to meet you, Gerald. Actually, I was at the D20 free panel of the Hercules last year, and it was truly amazing seeing all the amazing artworks. And of course, Pink Floyd. My dad grew up with Pink Floyd and all the amazing artwork. So I just want to say thank you for making this classic Hercules and all these amazing artworks. And what's the most rewarding part of this entire career you did throughout the years?
Well, Hercules is certainly the pinnacle of it, really, because and to meet a nice guy like John, who's been, he's not like the director you usually hear about, who
I'm a
beats you.
monster,
No, he really encouraged me, and brought me along and helped me, and convinced all the animators that they should do this. It's extraordinary that an outside I'm the only animator, as John said, and the only designer, as John says, who's ever intervened into Disney. Yeah. I think they said Salvador Dali was going to do it.
Yeah, Destino, he sort of was there for a few weeks, and then they parted company.
But I'm the only one, I'm the only outsider in Disney, really, and I'm proud of that. Yeah. But it's completely been made possible by John and all the animators there who were very kind to me, and really did try to leave their house style behind. And as you can see, some of the stuff we've seen there, it does have an element of my work about it, if not entirely. Yeah. But come on, it's like 100 of them and one of me.
Yeah. You're outnumbered.
Who's going to win?
Yeah. Was there one question? Yeah, go ahead. You could just hand her the mic. There you go.
Hi.
Hi.
Did working in theater change the way you design later on, designing in that 3-dimensional space?
Very much so. Did working in theatre change the way I think? It does. There's a thing about artists, I think, and maybe animators too, they want to bring their work to life, and one of the ways of doing that is to make it move in animation. Another way I've tried, of course, is to dress up actors in my creations and put them into my worlds, bring them forward, and sculpture is another way, making it 3-dimensional. And so it's very much one of my aims, really. I think that's why I first started to work in paper mache, to make it, a drawing tricks the eye that it is 3-dimensional. It's actually 2-dimensional. You draw with perspective and try and give a feeling of rotundity, but in actual fact, it's a flat drawing. But with a sculpture, you can make it round, and you can go around it. And with actors, you can do the same thing. So yeah, working on theatre very much changed my view of, how to bring things to life, really. It's the ultimate trip to think of something and have it acted out on stage with people wearing the costumes and so forth. So considering I started as that sickly asthmatic, I've been very lucky.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay. I think
there's one
we'll
guy.
maybe just one quick one, and then we've got to go, I think so.
I was just wondering, obviously your artwork is so, it's delightfully outrageous. I was just wondering, when you first started drawing, were you ever afraid of crossing the line? Or do you ever fear what you...
What, my cartoons?
Yeah.
Am I frightened by what... Well, no, I think it's the other way around. What I'm frightened of, I draw. I think it's that when I was a kid, if I was frightened of witches or whatever it was at that time, I would draw them. And it's a way of getting it out, getting it on paper, unloading yourself. And I certainly think with my drawings of Trump and co. and Assad and all of these other people, tyrants around the world, not that Trump's as bad as Assad, it's a way of me expressing myself, and I feel better, for doing that. And I'm very lucky in Britain to be able to have the freedom to do that. The important thing is that, in my case, freedom of speech, being able to say what you want to say. I often work in newspapers where the policy of the paper is against what I'm presenting, but I think it's incredibly healthy to have two points of view, to have the other point of view. Otherwise, you're just in a sort of a society that's preaching to you and indoctrinating you. You have to have a healthy, different point of view. So that's the luckiest part of my life, I think, is to be able to be allowed to do that, to have this freedom of speech. We all saw what happened in Paris with Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah.
That cartoonists killed them, for their point of view. Completely wrong, we all know that. And so, freedom of speech.
Yeah. So thank you all for coming. Gerald Scarfe, ladies and gentlemen, the great Gerald Scarfe. Thank you, Gerald.